Do you know what truly broke my heart? It wasn't a dramatic case in a packed courtroom, nor a trial dragging on until midnight. It was the moment I sat on the defendant's bench, not because I had committed a crime, but because my own mother stood up, pointed at me, and said in front of everyone, "My daughter is not fit to be a mother. She can't even hold a stable job." The entire room fell silent. A low wave of whispers rippled through the crowd. People believed her without needing any proof, and there I was, Evelyn Whitman, the Supreme Court Judge of California, suddenly painted as incompetent, irresponsible, and unworthy in the eyes of my own 8-year-old son. I know it sounds absurd, doesn't it? A woman who had dedicated her life to protecting justice, who had written dozens of rulings safeguarding children, was now being accused by her own mother of being unfit to raise her child. How ironic can life be? My name is Evelyn Whitman. I am 39 years old, 15 years in law, 8 of them as a Supreme Court judge. I make $270,000 a year, live in a penthouse in Los Angeles, and own a vacation house at Lake Tahoe. And yet, to my family, I am nothing more than a divorced woman driving an aging car, someone who sometimes misses family dinners. To them, I'm not a source of pride. I'm just a walking wallet. That day, I sat in a courtroom I knew like the back of my hand. But instead of presiding over a case, I was the one being judged. Across from me sat my ex-husband, Daniel Carter, dressed in a flawless suit, his lips curled into a smug smile. Beside him, his attorney, James Crawford, was fully armed with a meticulously crafted strategy. And the most shocking of all, standing at the witness stand was none other than my mother, Lorraine Jones. The same woman who once hugged me tightly when I got into law school was now pushing me off a cliff without hesitation. Her voice was steady, her words sharp as blades. Evelyn has always lived an unstable life. She disappears for days, always using work as an excuse, but no one really knows what she's doing. She lacks stability. Tyler needs a father who can provide a proper home and a steady income, not a patched-together mother. I turned my head toward the audience. My son, Tyler, sat beside my sister, Karen Jones. His wide, bewildered eyes locked onto his grandmother, the same woman he hugged every Christmas, hearing her say his mother wasn't good enough. My chest tightened. A silent scream trapped in my throat. I didn't speak. I knew the rules of this game. In court, timing is more important than arguments, more important than emotions. So I stayed quiet, letting them exhaust themselves. Daniel nodded along, as if every word was gospel. Karen kept her head down, silent but complicit. And Lorraine? She was relentless, spinning a narrative where I was nothing more than a failed mother. Inside my head, questions piled up like thunder. Why was she doing this? Was it love for her grandson or resentment toward her own daughter? Why was Karen silent? And Daniel, the man who shared 6 years of my life, had he never truly known what I did for a living? I swallowed my anger, waiting, letting it build. But when I heard my mother deliver her final blow, we even suspect she may be involved in something illegal. I felt the heat rush to my face, blood pounding in my ears, and right then, I knew it was time to flip the game. But one question still hangs heavy in my mind. In that courtroom full of strangers who called themselves family, who was truly standing by my side, I sat up straight, my hands gripping the cold wooden table. My mother's accusations still echoed in my head, each word slicing deep like a knife. I turned to Daniel, He caught my gaze and smirked. That familiar victorious smile I had seen every time he signed a lucrative real estate deal. "Evelyn," Daniel began, his voice smooth, as if he had rehearsed it 1,000 times. "We all know who can truly give Tyler a real home. A spacious house in Pasadena, his own room with a brand new bunk bed, and a father who is always there." I let out a quiet laugh, tinged with bitterness. "Oh, right. A father who's there. When he's not busy meeting clients or dating his mistress." A murmur rippled through the audience. Daniel's face flushed red, but his attorney, James Crawford, quickly stood up. "Objection, Your Honor. This isn't the place for personal attacks." I turned my head and stared straight at my mother. "I have just one question for you. Lorraine, have you ever actually cared about my work or to you? Am I just an ATM machine to keep this family afloat?" My mother's face hardened. "Watch your tone. Evelyn, I'm only worried about my grandson. Worried about Tyler." I leaned forward, my voice dropping low. "By telling the court you suspect I'm involved in illegal activities, you used to sit by me all night while I studied for law school. You cried when I got into Yale. And now you stand here, in front of the entire world, claiming I can't even hold down a job." Karen, my sister, spoke softly. "Evelyn, stop. Mom just wants what's best for Tyler. You know, Daniel can give him more." I whipped my head toward her. "Give him more? What do you mean, like the lavish wedding? Daniel's plans for his ex-girlfriend cost as much as a house, or those luxury vacations while our son waits every weekend for his father to come home." Karen dropped her gaze, silent. Daniel slammed his hand on the table, his voice rising. "Stop turning this into a family trial. This is about Tyler's best interests." I nodded slowly. "Exactly. Tyler's best interests. So, did you tell my mother that to pay for your upcoming wedding, you sold part of an asset that's under my name? Did you also tell them the signature on the bank documents isn't yours, but a forged version of mine?" The entire courtroom erupted into chaos. I stared at Daniel, then glanced at Lorraine and Karen. My mother's face went pale, her eyes wide in shock. Karen's breathing grew unsteady. Daniel clenched his jaw so tightly he couldn't say a word. I continued, each word hitting like an arrow. "I've stayed silent for far too long. They thought I would swallow every betrayal with a smile, but no. Today, here, I'll make sure everyone sees the truth." Judge Morrison pounded the gavel, calling for order. I sat down, but my eyes never left the 3 people who once were my family. And in my mind, one question kept repeating over and over: if they dared betray me right here in this courtroom, how many more filthy secrets are still buried out there that night? I sat alone in the penthouse in Los Angeles. The room was spacious but cold. The warm yellow light spilled across the desk, cluttered with files. I slipped off my navy blazer and tossed it onto the sofa as if cutting ties with the chains of the long day. My mother's accusations still echoed in my head. She can't hold down a job. She disappears for days. She's unstable. My entire life, I had built the image of a strong, disciplined woman, and yet, with just a few sentences from her, everything was twisted and distorted. I leaned back, eyes shut tight. A hot tear slid down my cheek. That tear wasn't for Daniel, nor for Karen, but for my mother. The woman who once held my hand on my first day of law school now stood as a witness against me. I saw Tyler in my mind, his little face, his confused eyes. My son, only 8 years old, was dragged into this vicious game. My chest tightened as if gripped by an invisible fist. Guilt consumed me. Guilt for being too busy. Guilt for believing that keeping my work a secret would somehow protect him. But instead, my silence became the weapon they used to strike me. I stepped out onto the balcony. The city stretched endlessly. Los Angeles lights glittering beneath the night sky. People out there were laughing and living while I, a Supreme Court judge, was being reduced to a failure within my own family. In my mind, another voice emerged, colder, sharper. They think you'll bow your head. They think you'll stay silent to keep the peace, but you have nothing left to lose. I inhaled deeply. The fury inside me no longer burned wildly. It had cooled into tempered steel. Resolve. I would not let Tyler grow up believing his mother was weak. I would not allow the truth to be buried under the lies that Lorraine and Daniel had built. I returned to my desk and opened my laptop. File after file appeared on the screen, including cases I had presided over and rulings I had signed. And in that moment, it struck me I had spent my entire life defending justice for others, but when it came to myself, I had been yielding. It was time to balance the scales. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled open the drawer and took out a thick envelope. Inside were bank statements, property records, and a few documents Daniel would never want anyone to see. I had suspected him for a long time. Today's trial only confirmed it. He, along with my mother, had chosen betrayal. I told myself, they declared war when they forged my signature. I'm merely preparing to end the battle they started. The night stretched on. The clock ticked past 2 a.m, yet I sat there, poring over every page. Each piece of evidence was a puzzle piece, fitting together into a clearer picture. Every line, every number, transformed the ache in my heart into fuel. Out there, the city slept. But I, Evelyn Whitman, was wide awake, and I knew, when the morning came, a new chapter would begin. But how would I strike the first blow the next morning? I sat in front of the mirror, my messy hair falling over my shoulders. The dark circles under my eyes revealed a sleepless night. I let out a bitter laugh at myself, a Supreme Court judge of California. Someone who writes laws to protect thousands of families. Yet I couldn't even protect my own. I opened the drawer and pulled out a thick folder. The papers were smudged with pen marks, and the old printed Excel sheets looked worn out. Every number was a scar no one else could see. $2,800 a month. That was the amount I had been transferring to my mother, Lorraine Jones, for the past 3 years, so she could pay off her credit card debt and maintain the old house. I never told anyone. I just quietly sent the money, thinking it was the right way to fulfill my duty as a daughter. Then there was $700 a month for Karen, my older sister. When she needed money to fix her roof and pay her daughter's tuition, I called it the Family Emergency Fund, but in reality, it was all my money. And then there was Daniel, the man who once swore before God to protect me. He had sunk deep into a failed real estate investment, who covered the $35,000 shortfall to keep him from going bankrupt. I did it silently, believing that saving his career also meant protecting a home for Tyler. I still remember the day I signed that check. Daniel hugged me and said, "You're my savior." Looking back now, those words sound like a cruel, mocking sentence. I sat there, numbers swirling in my mind. How many years, how much money, how many personal dreams had I sacrificed? And for what? A mother who turned her back on me, a sister who stayed silent, an ex-husband who betrayed me. I took a deep breath, trying to hold back my tears, but my hands trembled as I flipped through the last few documents. I had kept them afloat, and yet now they had joined forces to tear me apart in court as if I had been leeching off them all along. A cold voice echoed in my head. They didn't just take your money, they took your dignity. They took your honor in front of your son. I stood up and stepped out onto the balcony. The morning wind was sharp and cold, carrying the smell of car exhaust and the city's restless rhythm. I wondered all these years. I lived humbly, drove an old sedan, dressed simply, just to give Tyler an ordinary childhood. But it was that very humility that made them look down on me. They believed I had nothing. I gripped the folder tightly. The papers rustled in the wind, but I clutched them to my chest as if holding onto a vow. No more silence. If they dared to forge my signature, sell the property under my name, and smear me to take Tyler away, then I would use these very documents to expose them. I walked back into the room, opened my laptop, and typed in my password. The screen lit up, showing my contact list, and there, a familiar name flashed like a guiding light, an old ally from the legal world. I placed my hand on the mouse, my fingers trembling. It was time to call him. But was I truly ready to start this war? My finger paused on the screen, right over a familiar name, Richard Hale, a veteran lawyer, a former colleague, and one of the few people I truly trusted. He once told me during a particularly grueling trial, "Evelyn, justice doesn't come to those who sit quietly. It comes to those who dare to stand up." I hit call. On the other end, his deep, steady voice came through. "Whitman, good Lord, it's been ages. What makes you think of me at this hour?" I took a deep breath. "Richard, I need you. My family, they forged my signature, sold off property under my name, and now they're trying to take Tyler from me." There was a long pause. Then his tone hardened. "Send me every document you have. Now. And brace yourself. Evelyn, this isn't a family dispute anymore. This is a legal war." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "I'm ready. They declared war first. I'm just finishing what they started." That afternoon, my office turned into a battlefield. On the desk were piles of files, bank statements, and records. I marked everything in red ink forged signatures, shady transactions, and even the text messages Daniel had sent me, lines of words dripping with intent. Richard arrived an hour later. His gray suit was slightly wrinkled from rushing, his laptop tucked under one arm and a stack of freshly printed documents in the other. He sat down, his eyes scanning the chaos on my desk. "Jesus, Evelyn." He shook his head. "Did they really think you'd just sit back and take this?" I smirked faintly. They thought I'd swallow their betrayal with a smile. They forgot I've sat on the judge's bench for 15 years. I know the law. Every loophole. Every trap they're about to walk right into. We divided the work. Richard would handle the criminal complaints, signature forgery, and asset fraud. I would take care of the civil side, securing custody of Tyler and freezing every account before the money vanished. Night fell, but the room blazed with the glow of desk lamps. Papers were scattered across the floor. The sound of my pen cutting through each fabricated line was sharp and unforgiving. Each strike felt like a blade, slicing away the lies, exposing fragments of the truth. In the middle of it all, my thoughts drifted to Tyler. I whispered to myself, "Sweetheart, I won't let anyone take you away from me. Not a single person." Richard looked up, his expression grave. Evelyn, I've seen plenty of betrayal cases, but I've never seen a mother go up against her own daughter like this. Are you absolutely sure you want to bring this out into the open? I met his gaze, my voice unwavering. Richard, I've paid $2,800 a month to my mother, another $700 to my sister, and I shelled out $35,000 to bail Daniel out. They took my money, then painted me as a failure. No. This time, there will be no forgiveness. I want every single truth exposed. He nodded, typing rapidly on his laptop. All right. Then we start here. The complaint gets filed first thing tomorrow. By the time Richard left, the clock was nearing midnight. I stood by the window, staring down at the endless stream of headlights crawling along the freeway. There were no tears left in me, only fire. They thought I was weak. But this time, I hold the scales, and I will make every last one of them taste justice. A new notification flashed on my phone screen. Sender Daniel Carter. The message was only 3 words you've lost already. I tightened my grip on the phone, the corner of my lips curling upward. Oh, you have no idea. Daniel, the game has only just begun. The next morning, I walked into the office building with my usual composure. Same dark blazer, hair neatly tied up, expression cold and unreadable. But this time, there was a fire burning inside me. I knew the wheels were finally in motion. At exactly 9 o'clock, Richard called. His voice came through the phone, calm yet firm. Evelyn, the court has approved the emergency freeze. Daniel and Lorraine's accounts are temporarily locked until further clarification. I closed my eyes, letting a faint smile curve my lips. For years, they had gotten used to living off my money or shady deals. Now, I could almost picture them standing in front of the bank screen, pressing buttons over and over, unable to withdraw a single dollar. Not long after, my phone buzzed nonstop. Notifications from the family group chat, the same one that used to be filled with cat memes, recipe swaps, and endless reminders for me to send money on time. Karen, what's going on? Why was my card declined at the grocery store, Lorraine? The bank said the account's frozen. Evelyn, do you know anything about this? Daniel, what kind of pathetic stunt is this? I stared at the screen, watching the frantic lines of text. I didn't reply. I let them drown in their panic. It felt like sitting in the front row, watching the elaborate play they had written finally crumble on stage. By noon, I was sitting in my usual cafe in downtown Los Angeles. My cappuccino was still steaming, the streets outside buzzing with traffic. I unlocked my phone and scrolled through more messages. Lorraine Evelyn, I'm your mother. How could you do this to me, Karen? You're tearing this family apart. We were only thinking about what's best for Tyler. Daniel, if you think freezing my accounts will make me back down, you're dead wrong. A bitter laugh escaped my lips, my inner voice dripping with sarcasm. Oh, now you remember you're my mother. Lorraine, when you stood in court, you didn't see me as your daughter, and you, Karen, what's best for Tyler, or what's best for your wallet. At the next table, a group of college students laughed loudly, their voices bright and carefree. I sat there quietly, caught between relief and bitterness. Justice had finally started knocking, but it wasn't echoing in the courtroom. It was pounding directly into their everyday lives, where every dollar they once spent freely was suddenly gone. By late afternoon, Richard sent another message. The criminal lawsuit has been accepted. Our first hearing will be next week. I typed back, "Good. Let them see this isn't just a custody battle. This is the truth coming to light." That night, I sat by the window in my penthouse, the city glowing beneath me while my thoughts remained still. Then the phone rang, Lorraine's number flashing on the screen. I let it ring, untouched. The sound went on, then fell silent. A minute later, a text appeared. "Evelyn, if you don't stop this, we'll all lose everything. You can't be this cruel." I sighed softly and whispered to myself, "No, Mother, I'm just giving back the debt you created." I drew the curtains shut and walked into my bedroom. In my mind, the images of Daniel's rage, Lorraine's desperation, and Karen's panic replayed over and over. They thought this was just a temporary storm. They had no idea this was only the beginning. Tomorrow, when the official documents are made public, the real storm will hit. The only question is who will be the first to fall Monday morning before the sun had fully risen. My phone buzzed nonstop. Not once, but dozens of notifications are flooding in. I opened it, exactly as I expected. The family group chat had exploded. Messages poured down the screen like a violent storm. "Lorraine, Evelyn. What have you done? My savings account is frozen, Karen. My credit card got declined. I can't pay for my daughter's tuition, Daniel. You've lost your mind. My investor contract just got canceled because they heard my company is under investigation." I set the phone down on the table, took a sip of coffee, and calmly observed the chaos unraveling. For a brief moment, I felt a pang of sorrow, but it was instantly replaced by a deep sense of satisfaction. This wasn't random destruction. This was the consequence of greed and betrayal. By noon, Richard called. His voice carried urgency. "The news is out. Evelyn, the prosecutor's office is officially involved. They've frozen all transactions related to Daniel's real estate company. And Lorraine, she's been asked to explain some unusual debts." I leaned back in my chair, my lips curling into a cold smile. Good. This is only the beginning. Richard gave a short, dry laugh. "You know, my office phone has been blowing up all morning. The press caught the scent." I pictured Daniel, the man who once arrogantly boasted to his friends that he had it all, now bowing his head before a crowd of reporters. I imagined Lorraine frantically calling one bank after another, only to hear the same response over and over: "Your account has been frozen." "Ma'am." By late afternoon, I got another call. This time, it was Karen. Her voice trembled, breath shallow and uneven. "Evelyn, please, I know I was wrong to stay silent, but my daughter needs her tuition paid. We're sisters, aren't we?" I closed my eyes, letting the silence stretch between us before replying slowly, deliberately, "Sisters." "When Mom stood in court and called me a failure, where were you? When Daniel forged my signature, did you even ask me a single question? And now you want me to save you," Karen sobbed, but I ended the call. My chest felt heavy, but I knew I couldn't afford to be soft. That evening, I sat in the living room with my laptop open. The local news broadcast echoed through the room. Carter Real Estate has suspended operations amid allegations of document fraud. Sources confirm an ongoing investigation. Daniel's face appeared on the screen, distorted under the harsh glare of camera lights. He hurried out of the building, reporters swarming around him. "Mr. Carter, do you have any comments?" one voice shouted, sharp and relentless. Daniel kept his head down and said nothing. I turned off the TV. The room fell silent, except for the pounding of my heart. This wasn't just revenge. This was the truth finally being exposed. My phone buzzed again. A new message from Lorraine. You may win in court, but you'll regret humiliating your mother like this. I stared at the screen, a cold wave of anger crawling down my spine. I whispered under my breath, just loud enough for myself to hear, "No, Mother, this humiliation, you brought it upon yourself." Outside, the city roared with life, but inside me, everything felt like the calm before a greater storm. And I knew, without a doubt, this was only the prologue. The only question was when the storm hits. Who will be the first to fall to their knees and beg for mercy the next morning? My phone wouldn't stop ringing. This time, it wasn't text messages, it was direct calls. The first one was from Karen. I hesitated for a moment, then picked up. Evelyn. Her voice trembled, choked as if she was completely lost. "Please, I beg you. You know I'm not as bad as Daniel. I just couldn't go against Mom. I was scared. But I never, ever wanted Tyler to lose his mother." I stayed silent. A flicker of pity stirred inside me, but then the image of Karen sitting silently in the courtroom came back. That silence had been as heavy and sharp as a blade. I finally spoke, my voice slow and steady. "You chose silence, and silence is betrayal." Karen broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. I hung up. My hand trembled slightly, but I knew I couldn't allow myself to soften. Less than 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. "Daniel." I answered and heard his venom-laced voice. "Proud of yourself, aren't you? You've dragged my company down and humiliated me in front of the press. But listen to me, Evelyn. You can't destroy me. I'll drag you down with me." I let out a cold laugh. "Did you forget? Daniel, you forged my signature. You sold off assets under my name. If I wanted to, you'd have been sitting in prison long ago." He roared, "Don't act like you're better than anyone else. You're no longer my wife. You're just a bitter woman, hell-bent on revenge." My reply was sharp, cutting like glass. "No, Daniel, this isn't revenge. I'm simply letting the truth speak for itself. And you hate it, because the truth exposes you for the liar you are." I hung up. My heart pounded in my chest, but a quiet sense of liberation crept in. By the afternoon, it was Lorraine's turn to call. I hesitated but answered anyway. Her voice trembled, soft and frail, so unlike the iron firmness she showed in the courtroom. "Evelyn, please, I'm begging you. I was wrong to side with Daniel. I only thought a successful man could give Tyler a better life. I never imagined it would all turn out like this." I gripped the phone tightly, my vision blurring. I had spent my whole life longing to hear my mother apologize. But now that the words finally came, all I felt was emptiness. "Mom," I said softly, my voice shaky but firm. "You didn't just betray me. You betrayed Tyler. You planted in his head that his mother was a failure. I can forgive many things, but not that." The line went silent. Then came the sound of her breaking down, sobbing bitterly. I closed my eyes, listened for a brief moment, then firmly ended the call. 3 calls, 3 voices, 3 faces, one sister pleading, one ex-husband seething, one mother collapsing in regret, and me, standing in the very heart of the storm, torn between pain and relief. I sat down on the chair, drawing a deep breath. A haunting question echoed in my mind. Is this really my family, or are they just strangers wearing the mask of blood ties? My phone lit up again. This time, it wasn't from them. It was from Richard. A short message appeared on the screen. It's time. Tomorrow. You'll have the chance to make everything public. I stared at the screen, my chest tightening. Public. That word echoed like a hammer striking down. Tomorrow, every secret would be exposed. Would I have the strength to stand tall and uncover every single one of them the next day? The press conference room was packed. Camera flashes blinked nonstop. I stepped up to the wooden podium, adjusting the microphone to just the right height. In the tense atmosphere, I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I began in a low but steady voice. For years, I have lived humbly, choosing silence about my work and personal life. But today, I will no longer stay silent. The entire room went quiet. Dozens of eyes fixed on me. I took a deep breath and continued. My family stood before the court and accused me of being a failure, an unfit mother incapable of raising my son. But the truth is very different. The truth is, I have been providing $2,800 a month to support my mother, $700 to help my sister, and I once paid $35,000 to save my ex-husband from bankruptcy. I did it all quietly, believing it was my duty and an act of love. And what did I receive in return? Betrayal. A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. A reporter raised his hand. Judge Whitman. Are you saying your family forged your signature? I nodded, holding up a stack of documents. These are the bank records, showing my forged signature on the property sale agreement. My own relatives executed this behind my back. The rapid clicking of cameras erupted around me. I looked straight into the lens, as if I could reach through it to speak directly to every person watching from home. This is no longer just my personal matter. This is a story about trust, about how the people we love most can turn their backs on us in an instant. I have spent my life protecting justice for others, and today I am standing here to protect myself and my son. From the corner of the room, I caught a glimpse of Lorraine, her face pale, lips trembling. Karen kept her head down, tears streaming silently. Daniel clenched his jaw, struggling to maintain his composure. I turned back to the microphone, my voice firm and unwavering. Consider this my resignation as the anonymous benefactor of this family. I will no longer be the walking wallet, no longer the one who carries everyone else's debts. I am Tyler's mother, and I will protect my son with everything I have. Applause erupted from the back of the room, not from them, but from colleagues. People who had known me professionally for years. As the press conference ended, I stepped down from the podium, blinded by flashing lights. My heart felt heavy as stone, yet strangely lighter than ever before. I was no longer trapped in silence. I had brought the truth into the open for everyone to see. On the way home, I couldn't help but wonder, would this action save my reputation, or would it push my family to the point of no return? And to you, the one hearing my story, I want to say this sometimes. Silence doesn't protect anyone. Sometimes, to save yourself, you must be brave enough to stand up and expose the truth, even if it shatters the people around you. If this story touched a pain deep within you, leave a comment. I want to hear your thoughts. Would you choose silence, or would you choose to speak out? And don't forget to subscribe to Bitter Scars. Here, we share our wounds, not to dwell on them, but to turn them into strength. After the press conference, the atmosphere in my family changed completely. There were no more accusatory texts or desperate pleas. Instead, there was a chilling silence, a heavy, fractured silence that seemed to signal the blood ties had been permanently severed. Karen was the first to leave the family group chat. No goodbye, no explanation, just one click, and she was gone. I stared at the screen, a wave of emptiness washing over me. Sisters, a word that had bound us together throughout childhood, was now nothing more than a faint trace on an app. Lorraine, my mother, didn't disappear. She stayed, but her presence felt like a ghost lingering in the background. Every now and then, she would send a short, cold message, "I'm tired," or "Don't contact me anymore." I would read them, then delete them. Between us now stood a chasm too deep to fill. Daniel was different. He neither stayed silent nor begged for forgiveness. Instead, he went on the offensive. His personal page was flooded with harsh posts. "She's not the victim. She's the one who destroyed her own family." Hundreds of comments followed, splitting into sides, some defending me, others condemning me. I didn't bother to respond. The truth was already documented, backed by court rulings and legal papers. But what hurt me the most wasn't his attacks. It was when Tyler, after school, sat at the dinner table and asked, "Mom, why did Grandma say you're a failure? Is it because you stopped giving her money?" My chest tightened. I pulled my son into my arms and whispered, "No, sweetheart. Mommy's not a failure. Mommy just chose to stand up when others tried to make her weak." Tyler nodded slowly, his innocent eyes full of trust. But I knew, deep down, that a scar had already formed, one carved by our very own family. News spread quickly. Old friends, colleagues, neighbors, everyone knew. Some reached out to comfort me, while others quietly kept their distance, afraid of getting caught up in the mess. I understood. The truth, no matter how necessary, always came with a price. One afternoon, I received a call from Xander, the fiancé of a close friend who was supposed to marry into our family through Karen. His voice was steady but tinged with regret. "Evelyn, I'm sorry, but I can't marry Karen anymore. I don't want to step into a family full of schemes and betrayal. I respect you, but I have to protect myself." I sat there in silence. Karen had lost her engagement. The family wasn't just fractured, it was collapsing, piece by piece. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the distant city lights. Inside me was a strange mix of pain and relief. Pain for losing my mother, my sister, the family I once knew, but relief because, at last, I was no longer bound by their lies. My family had fallen apart beyond repair, and yet I knew there was still one final confrontation waiting to happen. One last conversation not in court, not on the news, but behind four walls. And the question haunted me all night when we finally face each other. Will there still be room for the truth? Or will there be nothing left but the ashes of a dead family I knew this moment would come sooner or later? One evening, after dropping Tyler off at a friend's house for a sleepover, I received a text message. "We need to talk. Meet at the old house." The sender was Karen. I went. The house where I had grown up was now dark, with only a faint yellow light spilling from the living room. I stepped inside, and the creaking wooden door felt like a reminder that every memory here had become a burden. Inside the room, Lorraine sat on the sofa, her back more hunched than I remembered. Karen stood by the window, her eyes red and swollen. Daniel was there too, hands shoved into his pockets. his face twisted with a deep scowl. The air was thick, heavy. I stood tall, refusing to look away. "All right then. Let's talk. Say everything you were too afraid to say in front of everyone else." Lorraine spoke first, her voice trembling. "Evelyn, I was wrong. But you went too far. I never wanted this family to fall apart." I laughed, sharp and bitter, the sound echoing through the room. "Never wanted it. You stood in court and told the judge I was a failure. You planted in Tyler's head that his mother wasn't worthy. If that isn't tearing this family apart, then what is?" Karen jumped in, her voice breaking. "I know I was wrong to stay silent, but you have to understand. Taking your side meant going against Mom. I wasn't brave enough." I looked at her for a long moment and shook my head slowly. Not brave enough, but brave enough to stay silent while watching me get destroyed. Silence. Karen, his still betrayal. Daniel smirked and let out a cold laugh. "Give it a rest. Evelyn, you won. You destroyed my company, humiliated your mother, and ruined your sister's engagement. Are you satisfied now? You never wanted this family. You just wanted revenge." I spun toward him, my voice steady and sharp, each word dropping like a hammer. "I'm tired of pretending we're a loving family. You were never a husband. She was never a sister. And Mom." I stopped, my eyes burning. Mom was never truly someone I could lean on. The room fell silent. I could hear the ticking of the clock and the pounding of my own heartbeat. Lorraine lowered her head, her shoulders trembling. Karen burst into tears. Daniel said nothing, his jaw tightening. I drew a deep breath, forcing my voice not to crack. "I've spent my entire life chasing your approval. But tonight, I finally understand something I will never get from any of you." I turned, hand on the doorknob. Before stepping out, I spoke, my voice low but steady from this moment on. "I am no longer part of this family. I choose the truth over toxic ties." The door slammed shut behind me. Outside, the night wind blew hard. I stood alone on the porch, inhaling deeply. Inside me, there was an emptiness but also a strange, quiet relief. But as I walked away, a thought crept in. If I no longer have a family, then what do I have left? I stepped out of the old house, the sound of the door slamming shut behind me still echoing in my chest. That dry, final thud felt like it severed the last fragile thread tying me to them. The California night was colder than usual, the wind whipping against my face. But I didn't shiver. I was far too exhausted to fear the cold anymore. I sat in my car for a long while, my hands resting on the steering wheel. The tears had stopped falling. What remained was only a quiet emptiness. I once believed I would fall apart if I ever lost my family. But in that moment, I suddenly realized the only thing I had truly lost was the illusion that I ever had them. That night, when I returned to the penthouse, I stood in front of the mirror for a long time. The woman staring back at me has deep eyes, shadowed by sleepless nights, yet glowing faintly with newfound determination. I touched the cold glass and whispered softly to my reflection, "Evelyn Whitman, you no longer need their approval." I thought about Tyler. That little boy was the reason I could still stand tall. I remembered his smile when he ran into my arms, his innocent eyes lighting up as he whispered, "Mom, I'm proud of you." That alone was enough to remind me that my worth was never defined by their praise or acceptance. The next morning, I woke up early, made myself a cup of coffee, and opened the window to watch the city slowly come to life. The sounds of cars passing by, birds greeting the morning, the faint mix of exhaust and coffee in the air. Everything was so ordinary, and yet, within that ordinariness, I found an unfamiliar sense of peace. For the first time in years, silence no longer felt like a sentence. It felt like freedom. No more demands. No more messages asking for money. No more double-faced words laced with manipulation. Just me, the sunlight spilling into my room, and the quiet power of owning myself. I grabbed my notebook and began to write a few lines. I am no longer a walking wallet. I am no longer the bridge for those who betrayed me. I am a mother, a judge, and a person of worth. Each sentence I wrote felt like a blade slicing through the chains of the past. With every word, I felt my lungs fill more easily, as though my chest had finally been unbound. That afternoon, when Tyler came home, I pulled him into a tight hug. I said, "Son, from now on, we're going to live a simpler life, but a peaceful one. No one will ever make us feel ashamed again." Tyler nodded, his little arms tightening around me. In that moment, I knew I wasn't alone. I had never truly lost everything. I had only just found myself again. As night fell, I sat on the balcony, gazing out at the golden lights scattered across Los Angeles. The breeze brushed through my hair, carrying with it a sense of freedom. And inside me, a new question began to rise. Not about loss anymore, but about purpose. If my story could help someone else who's been betrayed to stand up again, should I share it more widely? A week after the press conference, I walked into the courthouse. Normally, I tried to stay discreet, but today the way people looked at me was completely different. There were no more suspicious glances, no more whispers behind my back. Instead, there were silent nods and a few encouraging smiles. A young colleague, a newly appointed judge, approached me. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Justice Whitman, thank you. Because of your story, I finally had the courage to admit that my parents have been financially exploiting me for years. I used to feel so ashamed, afraid people would judge me. But now I understand the truth isn't shameful. Betrayal is." I held her hand and looked straight into her eyes. "That's right. We don't need to carry someone else's guilt." The words came out naturally, but in that moment, I realized something profound. My story was no longer just mine. It had become a mirror for those who were silently suffering. In the days that followed, I received dozens of emails. One woman shared how she had supported her entire family for 10 years, only to be labeled useless when she could no longer give more money. A man confessed that his own brother had forged his signature to take out a bank loan. They all ended their letters with the same sentence: "Your story gave me the courage to speak up." Each email felt like a blade cutting through society's silence. And as I read every word, tears fell uncontrollably. I was not alone. Tyler was not alone. One evening, I attended a talk at my old law school. In the packed auditorium, a student stood up and asked Justice Whitman, "Weren't you afraid? Weren't you afraid of losing your reputation, of being hated by your family?" I smiled, my voice ringing through the room. "I've been afraid my whole life, afraid of being abandoned, afraid of not being enough, afraid of losing the people I love. But when I faced the greatest fear of all, betrayal by my own family, I realized something. The truth set me free. Reputations can be rebuilt, families can be lost, but your self-worth, No one can take that away. The entire hall fell silent and then erupted into thunderous applause. That night, back home, I sat on the sofa with Tyler. He rested his head on my shoulder and whispered, "Mom, I told my friends that my mom's a brave judge. They said you're really cool." I laughed softly and pulled him into a tighter hug. "I don't need to be cool, Tyler. I just need you to know that I'll always stand by your side." His eyes glimmered in the dim light, like a small but steadfast lantern. In that moment, I knew I had won, not in court, not in the public eye, but in the heart of my son. But the ripple effect didn't stop there. The media began calling it the Whitman-Carter family case. Articles analyzed not only the legal aspects, but also the human values behind it. How a woman's courage to stand against exploitation reflected something deeper within society. With this wave of public support came mounting pressure on Daniel, Karen, and Lorraine. They were no longer just names hidden behind mine. They had become symbols of greed and betrayal in the public's eyes. One morning, Richard walked into my office and placed a stack of documents on my desk. "Evelyn," he said firmly, "the trial date is set. Next week. They'll have to face the court. This will be the final chapter." I stared at the papers, my heart pounding. Everything was leading to this moment. And yet, one question remained when the verdict is read. Will I feel victory, or just the emptiness left behind after everything falls apart? The day of the trial arrived, and the sky over Los Angeles hung heavy and gray, mirroring the suffocating tension inside the courtroom. I walked in, no longer wearing my familiar black judicial robe. Today, I was not a judge. I was just a woman, a mother, and a victim waiting for justice. Lorraine sat at the defendant's table, her face hollow, her silver hair messy and unkempt. Karen kept her head bowed low, her hands gripping the hem of her skirt. Daniel still tried to maintain his arrogance, but the dark circles under his eyes and the twitching of his jaw betrayed his anxiety. Presiding Judge Patricia Morrison entered the courtroom and struck her gavel 3 times. The sound echoed sharply, commanding authority and silence. "We are here to hear the case regarding signature forgery, property fraud, and perjury before the court. Defendants Daniel Carter, Lorraine Jones, and Karen Jones." The room fell silent. I sat behind Richard, feeling my heartbeat sinking with the rhythmic taps of his pen on the case file. The prosecutor stood, his voice deep and resonant. "Your Honor, we present evidence of forged signatures on property sale contracts, suspicious financial transactions, and false statements made under oath during the custody trial. This is not merely a betrayal of one woman. This is a betrayal of the law." A large screen lit up, showing a side-by-side comparison of the forged signature against my original one. A wave of murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Daniel lowered his head. Lorraine trembled. Karen burst into tears. Richard rose to speak, his voice steady and sharp. "Your Honor, this is proof of the truth my client has endured. Ms. Evelyn Whitman is not only a judge, she is a mother who was exploited, slandered, and betrayed by her own family." I closed my eyes. In that moment, memories flooded back the nights I sent money to my mother, the times I quietly rescued Daniel, the countless occasions I comforted Karen. All of it led to this single, defining moment, the moment justice stood on my side. Judge Morrison delivered the verdict, her voice ringing like a church bell. After reviewing the evidence and testimonies, The court finds Daniel Carter guilty of forgery and property fraud. Lorraine Jones and Karen Jones are found complicit for concealing information and committing perjury. The court orders administrative fines, financial restitution, and a 3-year probation for Lorraine and Karen. As for Daniel Carter, an 18-month suspended sentence and full repayment of all misappropriated assets. The final strike of the gavel reverberated through the courtroom like a thunderclap. I looked at Lorraine. She couldn't lift her head. Karen sobbed uncontrollably, tears streaming down her face. Daniel clenched his fists, but I saw the deep defeat carved into his eyes. I took a deep breath. Justice had spoken. Yet inside me, the feeling of victory was not pure elation. It was complex, bittersweet, a mixture of relief and loss. As I walked out of the courthouse, my steps felt unbearably heavy. I had reclaimed the truth, but I had also lost a family, even if it had been a toxic one. Outside, the California wind swept across the cold stone steps. I tilted my head up toward the gray sky, and in that moment, I knew the final chapter was approaching. After everything, would I have the courage to start a new life? One free from the shadow of betrayal. The trial had ended. The verdict had been delivered. Justice was on my side. But as I walked out of the courthouse's heavy doors, I knew this victory came without fireworks, without any triumphant music. It was only silence and the cold wind brushing across my face, reminding me that a chapter had closed. In the days that followed, I didn't receive any messages from Lorraine, Karen, or Daniel. The phone that once buzzed nonstop with pleas and threats had now gone silent. Silent to the point of being unsettling, yet strangely liberating. I had cut them off. The last toxic tie had been severed. That night, I sat on the balcony with Tyler. The city of Los Angeles stretched out beneath us, glowing like an ocean of stars. Tyler leaned against my shoulder, his little voice soft and clear. "Mom, is everything over now?" I nodded and gave him a gentle smile. "Yes, sweetheart. From now on, it's just you and me. We get to start over." His eyes lit up, and a small smile spread across his lips. In that moment, I understood happiness didn't come from the recognition I once craved. Happiness was right here in my arms, in the unwavering trust of my child. A few weeks later, I decided to reclaim the pieces of life I had neglected. I took Tyler on a short getaway to Lake Tahoe, to the vacation cabin that used to be nothing more than a brief stop after long, exhausting trials. We hiked through the woods, listening to the sound of dry leaves crunching under our feet, breathing in the crisp, clean air. Tyler laughed out loud as he tossed pebbles into the lake, each ripple expanding outward like a signal of new beginnings. That night, sitting by the fireplace, I opened my journal and wrote, "Some bridges need to be burned to save yourself." And I knew those words weren't just true for me. They were true for anyone who had ever been betrayed, belittled, or discarded. Sometimes, to survive, you have to accept losing the things you once thought were forever. When we returned to Los Angeles, I threw myself into a new project. No more hiding in the shadows. I decided to share my story with the people who needed to hear it. I wanted Tyler to grow up knowing that silence is not the only option. That true strength comes from standing up, from cutting loose the chains that hold you down. I looked back at the road I had walked, the tears, the betrayal, the loneliness, and even the victory, and I realized it had all led me to this moment, a moment of freedom. That evening, As I closed my journal, I stood by the window, gazing at the city lights flickering in the distance. For the first time in years, I felt truly at peace. No more fear, no more longing for anyone's approval. It was just me, my son, and an unwritten future. I whispered to myself, Evelyn Whitman, you've walked through fire, and now you are free. Looking back on it all, I came to understand one thing. Betrayal does not define who I am, but how I rise after it does. I'm no longer the woman who waits for her family's recognition. I'm no longer their walking wallet. I am a mother, a judge, and most importantly, a person who has learned to love herself. And if you've ever experienced the pain of being turned away by the people you love most, remember this: you are not alone. The scars may hurt, but they are proof that you survived. Share your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear your story. And don't forget to subscribe to Bitter Scars, where together we turn our wounds into strength.